Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and its tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And my name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed Navy videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that the government has admitted that UFOs are real,
Or at least that the videos were authentic.
it raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
Right? They may still be unlikely, but there's so many explanations for these stories. Even if the truth is more mundane than you're hoping, if any of it turns out to be true, whew.
Woo! It's a very exciting time.
All right, Scott, I I made a mistake last week. I was
Oh,
I was trolling the UFO subreddit and
oh no. Oh no, buddy, go back. You're not leveled up for that.
yes, you're right. I was not ready. I have some questions. I have a lot of
I bet.
questions. Um, so the first one is actually pretty mundane, I think. There's something about the Obama library, and there's like
Mhm,
37 million pages of whatever
mhm.
secret documents, and I just like I don't understand what this is, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can help me interpret.
Yeah, totally. It's a weird story. Let me preface by saying there's not going to be any satisfying information that comes out of this. It's one of those stories, but
Okay,
it
all right.
is intriguing. So, uh, kind of to rewind a little bit, a presidential library, if you're not super familiar with that term, they're actually part of the National Archives and Records Administration. They date back to Herbert Hoover. Um, and
Okay.
basically, it's after a president is done being president, they will create a presidential library that is responsible for preserving and making available to researchers like all the documents related to the president's life and career. You might remember that President Trump
Hmm.
was constantly getting in trouble for like shredding documents or tearing things up. That's
Right.
because presidents have a legal mandate to preserve every piece of paper that
Mm,
passes through their hands for the
okay.
presidential library. Um, John Greenwald Jr. operates a website called the Black Vault, which is entirely dedicated to making Freedom of Information Act requests,
Okay.
particularly about UFOs, extraterrestrials, ESP, stuff like that.
Okay.
So he routinely sends FOIA requests into various government organizations asking for everything they have on set of
Excellent.
keywords. And
Okay.
often he gets back like, oh yeah, we have, 30 documents and they're all classified or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So he asked the Obama library for everything it had on ATIP and OSAP, which are the two names of the like classified UFO programs in the Pentagon,
Okay.
and UFO and UAP.
Okay. Those are good keywords.
So you're right. So about a year ago, they wrote back and said they have 3,440 pages and
Okay.
26,271 unclassified electronic files.
Wow.
Uh,
Interesting.
in John's words, jackpot. I was
Yeah.
floored. If they actually have this much, I am floored about this. But
Huh.
he was immediately disappointed when he asked, can I see them? And they said, no, you can't come in person. We don't allow that. And he said, okay, well, can you release them to me? And they said, sure. There are 87 requests ahead of yours. Okay, doesn't
Sure.
sound like a lot. It'll take us 16 years
Oh my
to
gosh.
review and get them to you, which
Okay.
is not a great pace of fulfilling FOIA requests. Now, we talked
Yeah.
briefly about this before. I know a few people who work in government, and my brother, in fact, works for the Multnomah Educational Service District, and he gets
Okay.
FOIA requests sometimes. And he's like, it's frustrating because there's no one whose job is to do
Yeah.
this. So anybody who is fulfilling a FOIA request is being pulled away from their actual work. And it is, yes, it is a legal mandate. You are supposed to do it, but also you have to kind of fit it in around stuff. So when I hear
Yeah. Right.
16 years, I don't hear this task will take 16 years. I hear we are allowed to put 20 minutes a week into
Yeah.
this. you
Right.
know? Okay.
Yeah.
So that came out about a year ago. That would have been, it was an interesting story. It got a little bit of attention, but like there's no outcome from it other than, oh,
Yeah.
okay, the Obama library has a lot of UFO files. That's weird.
Yeah.
Whatever. I guess in 16 years we'll find out what they are.
Right.
But he just posted again, which is probably why it came across your radar.
Yeah.
And he said a year later, he was able, because they told him those were the unclassified files. So he filed a follow up request saying, well, how
Mm.
many classified files do you have? Because one
Right.
of the things about FOIA requests is you can request that classified information be reviewed for whether it can be declassified.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So he said, how many classified files do you have? And they got back and said, we have 5,196 electronic records that are
Wow.
classified. Now, that request was a little more vague. It's unclear
Yeah.
how
Of course.
many pages, videos, photos make up
Yeah.
a record. But yeah, like over
A bunch.
5,000 individual items that
Right.
are still classified. Uh, and it will take 12 years for them to review them for declassification. And there are only 23 requests ahead of his, which means they are reviewing 2 requests per year for declassification.
I
So
mean, makes
the
sense.
story here is one, the Obama Library has a surprising number of records that contain those keywords.
Yeah.
Um, but we don't know anything about them. Are these
Yeah.
files we actually already have? Are they things we
Right.
already know? Because remember, this is like every memo the president has ever sent or received, like any letters he wrote, like everything that could possibly exist that was related to Obama. And Obama was a pretty diligent president about following the
Yeah.
record keeping process. So probably a lot of this is nothing, but it's still a very high number. The
Yeah.
second story is it's going to take forever to get it. And that isn't
Right.
a slam on the Obama library so much as a slam on the state of processing FOIA requests in government in general. This is a
So does
particularly
every
extreme example, but
president
it's
have a library? Like, I I just assumed there was like a presidential library that all the presidents sent stuff to, but is there like a specific Obama library and a Trump library and a
mhm, yep,
oh, interesting. And
literally
they're all like
every
different
president since
organizations.
Herbert Hoover. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
and it kind of makes sense because their job is to process and review those individual files. So the
Mhm.
National Archives and Records Administration is like the umbrella organization over all of them, but each one is an individual group responsible for their files. So there's a Nixon library, there's a Kennedy library.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, that's exciting. And in 16 years, I look forward to finding out what I've learned. Um, yeah. I
Yeah.
have one other that I thought was very cool.
Mhm.
Um, there was I guess a tweet or something about one of the U-2 pilots looking down
Mhm.
on the Chinese balloon, and the thing I
Yeah.
thought was interesting was A, that it was a tweet, and B, that there was a reply to that tweet from some Navy official saying, "Yeah, this is legit, and we're working to release
Mhm.
it." And like,
Yeah.
I guess what I don't understand is like, is that pilot in like super much trouble? Or
It's a great question. I genuinely don't know. So we're actually going to
okay,
talk about this a little more later. But yeah,
oh, yeah, okay,
for anybody who's listening who's unfamiliar with this, basically, they sent up a U-2 spy plane, which surprisingly are still in existence. NASA, for
yeah,
example, still runs a bunch of them because they're still some of the highest flying planes we have available. Um,
yeah,
but they sent up a U-2 spy plane to overfly the Chinese spy balloon and like check it out. And the pilot of the U-2 literally snapped a selfie. I'm not even joking. It's literally like holding the phone at arm's length. You can see the
Yeah.
pilot's helmet, and you can see
Yeah.
out the window there's the shadow of the U-2 on the Chinese spy balloon. It's a kind of
Yeah.
remarkable photo. The debrief put up an article saying 5 surprising things we learned from the selfie photo, and it was like one. This is a two-seater U2. The person we're seeing in the photo is not actually the person taking the photo, it's the person in the other seat shooting past the pilot.
Oh,
And
cool.
there aren't very many U2s that have 2 seats in them. They were made for training. So apparently this
Yeah.
was one of those. And
Huh.
the shape of the plane told us something. Anyway, it was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that photo got leaked, and that kind of ties into the main story that I want to talk to you about today.
Yeah. Okay.
So, usually I try to come to you, and I've got a pretty clear topic, right? We're going to talk about Betty and Barney Hill. We're going to talk about
Yeah.
Bob Lazar. We're going to talk about the Pentagon UFO program, etc. So this week, the last 2 weeks, all I have been doing is just watching the aftermath of the Chinese spy balloon saga and what happened with
Okay.
it, because it was clear there was something going on, but it took a while to kind of get my head around, like, is there a narrative here? Is there a story here? Because
Hmm.
I like to kind of come to you with a
Yeah.
structure to these episodes. And I think I've done it, but basically a lot of weird stuff happened in the last two
Okay.
weeks. And I want to be clear to anybody who's listening. I'm about to go down a rabbit hole of, okay, they're just balloons, but maybe, you know, and I want to be clear, any individual thing I am about to talk about is not a big deal, and is not worth getting all hot and bothered about. But like cumulatively, over the course of two
Yeah.
weeks, all of these individually not that remarkable things happened that added up to a weird vibe. Like, it's not a clear, like, oh, this is happening or this is clear evidence of this. It's just, I don't know. The vibes are off, Chuck.
Yeah. I so I was just watching a mental health video where the guy talked about like um, actions happen after a change.
Uh-huh.
It's not the other way around. You don't go you don't start meditating in order to create a habit. You have to like come to the conclusion that you need to meditate first. Um, and it sounds kind of like something has changed, and now we're seeing a huge number of actions happening. And I think you're kind of
That's
projecting
possible. Yeah.
backwards to like,
A
okay,
little bit.
what happened? Because it's different now. Something
Yeah,
changed.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
So, let's start with the most mundane stuff. Okay? They're just balloons, unless they're
sure.
not. So,
Okay, they are a little
on
weird.
February 16th, after about a week of a lot of attention on the spy balloon and the successive 3
Mhm.
unknown objects that were shot down, President Biden held a press conference and he said the intelligence community's current assessment is that these 3 objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation, or research institutions.
Sure,
Um,
I buy it.
there's a term I really like. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Kremlinology.
Kremlinology? No.
Yeah. So back during the Cold War, right? Like, we didn't have any insight into the Kremlin. We had to infer their actions from what we could see. Okay, troop movements are happening over here. Russia
Okay,
condemned this guy. This person suddenly stopped talking, and you know.
right.
Um, but the term is still kind of in use for anytime you're kind of surveying something that you can't see directly and you have to kind of
Mm.
infer its shape. So if I feel like we've been doing a bit of Kremlinology here this week
Yeah,
of like, okay, they were just balloons. Don't worry about it. We just shot down some balloons. Okay, well, first of all, that's a little weird. Why were you shooting down balloons? And
yeah,
the answer is we didn't know they were there before. We have every reason to believe these sorts of things have always been in our airspace, but we had literally tuned our radar to ignore them because For our military who are concerned about incoming nuclear missiles and jets, they're literally irrelevant. We don't
Yeah,
want to know
totally.
about small, slow moving objects that drift with the wind.
Yeah.
But after the Chinese spy balloon, we talked last episode, I feel like there was
Maybe
a
we
lot of
should.
political pressure on Biden. They
Yeah.
recalibrated the radars, removed some of those filters, and suddenly we're seeing all these objects. And
Right.
again, reading between the lines here, I think they felt some political pressure to show that they
Yeah.
could respond decisively, and they shot down three of these things in a row. Um,
Yeah. It occurs to me that I don't know how heavy a small nuke is, but I wonder if it's less than 2 tons, because that's what I
yeah,
hear the Chinese balloon was carrying under it. Like
yeah. Now
maybe,
it's
yeah,
notable that the Chinese balloon was a lot bigger than these other three.
totally,
So,
and higher.
as a
Yeah,
reminder, the descriptions we heard of the other three objects, first of all, they were much lower. They were in the 20 to 40,000 feet, where they were genuinely in the path of commercial traffic. Um, Two of them were described as the size of an ATV,
okay,
which is kind of a weird
small car.
reference point, but like, okay, like smaller than a car, right? Um, One of them was a little larger. It was described as octagonal shape. None of them were described as having control surfaces, any means of propelling. They all seemed to be drifting with the wind. One of them
Sure,
was described as having lines dangling from it.
of
But
course.
at the same time, nobody wanted to call them balloons. They all
Yeah,
held
which is
back
weird.
from this. And we have cockpit audio. This, by the way, I think is fascinating. There was a little bit of confusion in the community. How do we have statements from the pilots the day this happened? That doesn't happen. The
Yeah,
Pentagon
right.
doesn't release transcripts of the pilot's audio on the same day. Where did these audio anyway? It turns out amateur radio enthusiasts were able to pick
Oh,
up the pilot's chatter. So we
yeah.
have recordings of the pilots, and
Okay.
they were saying things like, in the targeting pod, I can't tell if it's metallic or what, but I can see like lines coming down from below it, but I can't see anything below it. I wouldn't really call it a balloon. I don't know what. I can see it with my eyes. It looks like something. There's some kind of object that's distended. It's hard to tell. It's pretty small. So the
Yeah.
pilots were not getting a good sense of what these things were, but they were able to pick them up on their
Yeah.
targeting pods. They were able to see them visually. They did not show any of the five observables. So this pretty quickly
Okay.
falls outside the realm of the UFOs that we're interested in.
Okay, but wait,
Um,
did did they disable tracking systems or
no one knows. That was one of the
what?
things that was reported for one of the encounters, and not all the pilots reported that. So one of the
Okay.
pilots said the jet scrambled my system, the object scrambled my systems. Did it really? Was it a fluke? Who knows? Like, as a
Okay.
former IT person, I'm sure you know when you've got a bunch of users using the same hardware and one of them has a problem, I don't immediately
Right.
go to malign external
Aliens.
influences.
Oh,
you
well,
know,
maybe we should. Maybe we should blame
maybe.
aliens every time the website has a problem.
Yeah. But you're kind of hitting the nail on the head, right? Like we were getting weird, inconsistent reports. On the one hand, they're just balloons, don't worry about it. On the other hand, whoa, I wouldn't be so quick to call it a balloon. And also, maybe it scrambled my radar. And also, I don't know, it doesn't really look right. Like
Yeah.
nobody really knew what to make of it. Then,
Hmm.
around the same time as Biden's press conference, the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade reported losing contact with a silver-coated party-style Pico balloon off the west coast of Alaska shortly before one of the shootdowns. This is an
Interesting.
amateur balloon group who sends up balloons with little GPS trackers and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I had to look this up. I wasn't familiar with it. A Pico balloon, I believe Pico just refers to the fact that it's small.
Small.
When you launch them, they're about 3 feet in diameter. As
Okay.
an aeronautics nerd, you'll know that helium expands as you get up higher.
Yeah.
So the balloons actually expand to about
Yeah.
2 to 3 times that size by the time they get up to 20 to 30,000 feet. And they're fully capable of circumnavigating the globe like this.
Okay.
And there's companies that launch them. They've got restrictions on like they have to geofence their transmitters to not transmit over certain countries. Like North Korea
Interesting.
does not want you transmitting over North Korea. So they've
Huh.
got geofences on them and stuff.
Yeah.
The founder of a company that makes Pico balloons had this fucking hilarious statement. He said, I tried contacting our military and the FBI, and I just got the runaround. I was trying to enlighten them on what a lot of these things probably are, and they're not going
Yeah.
to look too intelligent to be shooting them down.
Yeah. Right.
uh,
Yeah. That, I mean,
so,
it always struck me as like, of course these are just freaking balloons or whatever. Like I had looked up the stat
right.
and like the US National Weather Service launches 60,000 per year. Like,
Mhm.
what are the
Now,
chances the
this gets
transponder
into
fell off
another
one of
thing.
them? You know?
Totally. Transponder fell off. These things are all supposed to identify themselves. The reason the Pico
Yeah.
balloons are interesting is they weigh less than 6 pounds, which means
Mm.
they are exempt from most FAA restrictions, such
Oh,
as
cool.
being in the airspace or having to
Yeah.
identify
Right.
themselves a certain way.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the questions is if these are balloons, they're supposed to identify themselves, and they're
Right.
not. So yeah, anyway. Um,
Yeah. So I don't know what the have you heard about the chicken cannon? Um,
no.
so there's a the way you test a jet turbine to make sure that it will handle a
Oh
bird.
no.
They have a cannon that launches like thawed chickens at
Oh
roughly,
no.
the right airspeed for a
Oh
747.
no.
So
Oh, I hope they
I
leave this
don't.
outside. I pity the poor guy
Oh
who
my
has to
God,
clean up the wind tunnel
I
after
know,
this
right?
test.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what a 6 pound like balloon or with all its instruments would do, but I have to imagine that it's
Right?
like, I don't know, maybe it's even less than the chicken cannon. Um,
I gotta assume, right? Like a mostly Mylar balloon. Anyway, yeah.
yeah.
So the next day, February 17th, National Security Council official John Kirby comes out and he says, we have not identified any possible entities responsible for these objects. And the reporter's like, well, what about this balloon club in northern Idaho? And he says, we saw their press release. They have not reached out to us, which is a weird thing for them to say. Like, aren't you supposed to be Shouldn't you be reaching out to them?
Right?
Like, why are you waiting to hear from someone who says they have information and you're aware of it? But anyway,
Yeah.
a reporter says it defies reason that you have zero idea what these objects were since the jets took videos. Will you release the videos? And
Hmm.
Kirby immediately responds, whoa, I never said we have zero ideas. I said we don't know what they are. I'm sharing this anecdote because almost all of our interactions with Kirby and the intelligence community were like this. They were weirdly
Hmm.
cagey. Like, and the reporters seem to be picking up on it. After a while, they're like, look,
Yeah.
if this is a nothing burger, if these are just balloons, why aren't you confirming that? Where's the
Yeah.
wreckage? He's like, well, we haven't been able to recover the wreckage. Once we recover the wreckage, we'll be able to determine for sure what it is. Like, yeah, but
Yeah.
you have photos and videos, right? Well, we're not really sure what they are. And one of the things that the UFO community picked up on is there was some rather particular language they used to describe these things. They said these objects had no visible means of propulsion, no flight surfaces. They were unidentified. They were objects. Like they
Hmm.
were seemed to be deliberately lifting language from the
Yeah.
UAP report. And at the same time, a report came out in the Wall Street Journal and another one in the New York Times from two reporters who were on the national security beat. And Ross Coulthart talked about this. And one of the things he says is when you're a reporter on the Pentagon beat, you live or die by whether or not the Pentagon is willing to talk to you. So if they come to you with a story, you feel a great sense of pressure to publish it pretty much the way they gave it to you. Because if
Hmm.
you don't, they might not come to you with the next thing that matters. And if it's something you don't think
Right.
matters, you can be inclined to just kind of roll with them. So if the Pentagon comes to you and says, look, all of the UAPs we ever saw were balloons. We've been telling you for a while now, they're all smoke, swamp gas, and Chinese drones and spy balloons. And this just proves it. There's no aliens. Like, it was all a bunch of hubbub. We can all stop worrying about UAP now. See, they're just Chinese spy balloons. And it's like, okay, yes, but as you and I talked about on here, the claim was never that all of the anomalous objects in the sky were UFOs. The claim was that a non-zero number of them were.
Yeah.
Chris Mellon has been very UFO daddy, hashtag UFO daddy, has been very clear that he fully expects that something like 80 to 90% of these anomalous objects are explainable and mundane. But
Yeah.
those 10% that exhibit the five observables, that behave in ways that defy physics, those are the ones we care about. Those are the ones we want to dig into. So
Yeah.
the fact that the Pentagon is suddenly coming out and kind of pushing this story like, hey, look, it's all UFOs, it's all weather balloons, it's all explainable, is like, I don't know, they never quite get up to that line, but it feels a little bit of Kremlinology here, like they're
Yeah.
trying to lead us to believe this, um,
Yeah.
which on UFO Reddit the week you were looking led the most conspiracy-minded people to start jumping to this is just another cover-up. You see,
Right.
they shot down a bunch of civilian balloons so they could debunk the UAP report.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
So to quickly catch up with the kind of wrap of this story of the objects that were shot down. On February 18th, the US and Canada announced that they had abandoned the search for the three smaller
Yeah.
objects. The,
That makes sense.
the RCMP, the Mounties, they released a really funny statement, said the object that was shot down over the Yukon was not tied to a scenario that justifies extraordinary search efforts.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Which, yeah, if they're pico balloons, first of all, it's going to be a small amount of mylar fabric that fell
Right.
into a lake or onto a
Oh, yeah.
mountain or onto an ice floe in Alaska.
Yeah.
I get it, right? We're thinking like something the size of the Chinese spy balloon. You should be able to recover that. But if it's a little pico balloon, yeah, there's not really going to be anything. I get it.
Yeah. Right.
Um, on February 22nd, the Pentagon released that selfie taken by the U-2 pilot. Now,
Yeah.
you asked earlier, is the pilot in trouble? That is a great question. I don't know. The
Okay.
selfie leaked in a lower res format on Twitter. It's unclear who leaked it, but presumably it was the pilot.
Yeah.
Uh, and later, the Pentagon came out, confirmed it was authentic, and released the high resolution version of it. Now,
Okay.
this is the same thing, if you remember, that happened with the three Navy videos that leaked, the
Right.
gimbal, the go fast, and the FLIR. All three of them leaked and were later confirmed as authentic by the military. Basically, once they were already out, the damage had already been done, and they went ahead and claimed it and authenticated it. This seems to be the same thing.
Hmm.
But then, 2 days later, on February 24th, the Pentagon said that they were not going to release any images of the three smaller shootdowns. They would not confirm that they even have images, much less release them publicly. But again, because we have the pilot audio talking about the targeting pod, we know that video exists. We know photos exist.
Yeah.
And if they're nothing, why wouldn't they? So this is what I mean, right? Like even in the it's a nothing burger camp, they're behaving weirdly about it in a way that kind of implies they're trying to debunk UAP, but also they won't come out and do the thing that would actually convince everyone it was nothing by releasing photos of these civilian balloons.
Right.
The most straightforward explanation I can think of this is that frankly it's a little embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone's a little worried that
Yeah.
somebody's going to ask, like, wait, so each of these Sidewinder missiles costs $400,000, and you shot four of them, one at each object, plus the first shot on one of them that missed.
Right.
So was this worth $16,000 to shoot down the
I
Bottle
think you
Cap
you
Brigade's
mean
party balloon?
I think you mean 1.6 million. Not
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. which is
I don't know, man.
and calls into
But
question like the military budget entirely. Like it gets people thinking
exactly.
about
Yeah.
money and the military, which is not a happy place
Yeah.
for the military.
So if I'm being practical about it, I think a lot of things are happening here that are all true. I think Biden felt some political pressure to act. I think the military is
Yeah,
embarrassed and kind of
yeah,
doesn't want to get any more egg on their face than they already have. I think the Pentagon seized on an opportunity to do a little bit of discrediting of the UAP subject, which they're
yeah, maybe.
clearly still extremely uncomfortable about being forced to talk about. Um, so yeah, it's a nothing burger, but it's wrapped up in all the stuff in the
Whole lot
UAP
of
world
juicy
in a
burger.
really confusing way. Like, so yeah, I'm not here telling you, oh, Chuck, they shot down a UFO. Like, no,
Yeah,
I think they did shoot down a party balloon. But the way they've behaved since they shot it down is really strange. Like,
yeah, yeah. It really feels like they have like some general at the top was like, all right, look, we're no longer uh, we're going to tell the truth about this stuff, and it's going to be awkward, and uh, and I want to never hear um, falseness coming, or like something that could be provably false later on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and and so I wonder if they're just being cagey for that reason.
Mhm.
If it did turn out to be something like subtly different than a balloon, like this general's guidance is like we don't want to be proved false later.
Mhm.
And yeah, so but I was just trying to find out like if there's a public way we can look at like leadership changes. Like was
Mhm.
there a new general promoted like 6 months ago or something? Um,
Yeah, I don't think there was, but it's an interesting question. So I want to keep us rolling here because
yeah, totally.
so I've broken this down into a couple of kind of separate segments. The thing that's important to understand is all of these segments were happening at the same time. So they're actually all interrelated. But for
Yeah,
the sake
totally.
of kind of presenting a story, I wanted to break them down. So that first story was they were just balloons. But
Okay. Yeah.
the second one is about a Senate UAP briefing. So
Okay.
on February 14th, and as a reminder, Biden came out and said they were civilian balloons on the 16th. So this is
Okay.
2 days before when we're still in the thick of are they alien? Are they Soviet? Are they Chinese? Like, who knows what they are?
On
The
Valentine's, no
in,
less. I have to
yeah,
imagine there were a lot of like Congress or senators who were not there. Um,
I
seems like
don't
a
know. Does the Senate
yeah.
strike you as a particularly amorous group?
No, but they do strike me as folks who would get out of work at any like possible reason. Yeah.
That's fair. Okay, so on February 14th, the entire Senate, or at least all those who were present, received a received a classified, all-encompassing briefing, which went beyond just the three object shootdowns and included briefings by Arrow on UAP. Arrow, if you don't remember, is the UAP office that Congress
Okay.
demanded the Pentagon set up. They're the new
Okay.
office that's responsible for this stuff.
Cool.
It's particularly notable that Arrow was involved in this briefing because Arrow was in no way involved in investigating the three objects that were shot down. That was
Yeah.
firmly over at the Pentagon and the
Yeah.
FAA. Like Arrow had nothing to do with it. Reading between the lines here, we're hearing anomalous objects. The senators want more information. So they pull all the experts, including Arrow, to give a briefing to the Senate on the state of unidentified objects in the sky. So,
Okay.
talking about the three that got shot down, but also more broadly about UAP in general.
Okay. Was this
Um,
a
Senator,
private briefing in the like special room or a more
I
open
don't know
briefing?
how it was done, but it was a classified briefing.
Okay, it was
So
class.
I,
All right,
but given that
that's
the
fine.
entire Senate is there, I don't know if it's they have to go to a special room or if they use the main room. I don't
Yeah, how
know.
do they just cram them all into the same closet? Like that seems weird.
It's a good question, right? Senator Rubio, who, by the way, if you don't remember, there are two senators whose names are particularly notable on the topic of UAP. Senator Marco Rubio, who is a Republican, and Senator Kristen Gillibrand, who is a Democrat. Um, Both of them are hardcore on this topic, and because of the fact that they're bipartisan, they have been surprisingly capable of pushing things through. Um,
Yeah.
Senator Rubio came out of that briefing and he said, listen, 95% of what was discussed in that room can be made public. We know what the spy balloon was. The other three instances, as they are described, both publicly and in there, are not new. I mean, we've heard the exact same descriptions in hundreds of cases, dozens this year alone. Clearly, he's talking about UAPs. Um, so Rubio's like, hey, we didn't hear anything new. But that's not all that surprising because Rubio is the one who has been banging the drum and has been on it and has been paying attention to UAP and has been pushing for the creation of the office. He's one of the senators who would be the most well informed about this topic. Another senator, Senator Blumenthal, commented on the UFO events and he said, the American people should be given more information. They're ready for it, they can handle it, and they need and deserve to know it. We don't have a lot of context for why he was saying that, but the implication is pretty clearly there's stuff the American people are not being told about either these three objects, or more likely about UAP in general.
Hmm.
Senator Kennedy said, it's clear to me that this is not a recent phenomenon. I had the impression that this was something that had happened over the last 2 weeks. Now, because he's saying this happened over the last 2 weeks, it is pretty clear he is referring to the three anomalous objects that were shot down
Yeah, right.
and the fact that they were detected on radar and we didn't know they were there. He says, and that's not accurate. This has been going on a long time, since 2017 at least.
What this is
2017 is an
question.
odd date for him to pick. And he mentioned at one
Yeah.
point they were told it went back to 2019. Now he's saying 2017. Is he referring to the Roosevelt event? That wasn't 2017. 2017 is notable because that's when the New York Times article came
Yeah.
out,
Right.
but it's not like that's when a particular notable incident happened. So I'm not clear what he's referring to. It is possible that what he's referring to is we have heard rumors that once they removed the filters from the radar, they were able to go back and look at it historically and see that these objects had been there back to the Trump administration.
Sure. Yeah.
So he might be referring just to anomalous, slow moving, likely balloon objects on the radar that we weren't aware
Yeah. That makes
of.
sense.
He was a little head up about it, and he said, the only thing I feel confident saying right now is that if you're confused, you understand the situation perfectly. Which is a
That's
banger of a
beautiful.
quote.
Yeah. Right.
That same day, Senators Gillibrand and Rubio were talking to the Wall Street Journal, and they said they hoped to correct a funding disparity that might be
Hmm.
hampering Arrow's work.
Oh, interesting.
Arrow, again, is the agency that they set up. They
Yeah.
basically dragged the Pentagon kicking and screaming into creating a new agency that was cross military and had to report to Congress. There have been rumors the whole time that the Pentagon has been dragging its feet. We have
Of
heard that
course.
they are underfunded. The line I've heard a few times is there's only 3 people working at Arrow. I have no idea if that's true,
Yeah. Right.
but we have been hearing that Arrow is underfunded. But this is the first kind of official statement I've seen on that. 2 days later, on February 16th, Senators Gillibrand and Rubio, along with 14 of their colleagues, so 16 senators, signed a bipartisan letter that they sent to the DoD calling for full funding of Arrow. It said, Arrow is facing a funding shortfall that will impede its ability to fulfill its mission. And they attached a classified document asking for a specific amount. So the public letter didn't include the funding amount. That was in the classified addendum. But they asked for a specific amount of money to cover this serious funding gap.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much money Arrow has, and I don't know how much money they want it to have. But
Yeah.
they are making it pretty clear that this isn't like, oh, it's a 10% shortfall. Like they make it sound like, hey, we told you to staff up this office to be able to execute the following mission. And instead you put three people in a closet somewhere and gave them $20. Like,
Yeah.
you
Right.
better get your shit together. The letter went on to say, in addition to securing the necessary funding, we request a briefing from your offices on your agency's plan to implement the dual reporting of Arrow to the leadership of the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. So it's like, hey, remember that shit we told you you have to do? You better fund it,
Gotta do
and
it.
you better come tell us what you're doing.
Yeah.
I I'm not gonna lie, I love this version of Congress. Like, hey, we passed a law saying you have to do it, and you're not doing it. You better get your shit
Yeah.
together.
Right.
Will they have the stones to follow through on that if the Pentagon continues to not do it? Because at some point, the next step is you haul someone before you and chew them out publicly, or you censure someone,
Yeah.
or you call for the firing of someone. Like, Congress
Right.
has a lot of power here,
Totally.
and it remains to be seen whether they will act on that. But
Yeah.
they are certainly showing every sign of, hey, we did this the right way.
Yeah.
We asked you for information, you gave it to us. We didn't feel you gave us enough information, so we told you you had to give us more. You gave us
Yeah.
more, we still feel you aren't giving us enough, so we mandated that you had to create an office that ticks the following boxes. It has been almost a year now. It is clear that you're not doing it. You need to take. So while it feels very slow for us in the general public, I suspect this is the pace that government is capable of interacting with the
Totally.
military. You got to give them a
Yeah.
chance to do it. It is now
Yeah.
clear that it's not just the regular growing pains, but you're genuinely dragging your feet on it. So,
Yeah.
all of that is to say, the Senate received a briefing, not just about the three objects, but about UAP in general. A bunch of senators came out and made some kind of weird statements. One of the senators joked that his reaction to the briefing they received was lock your doors tonight. Now, that was pretty clearly understood in the context of a joke in the moment, but like
Yeah.
multiple senators came out and said kind of odd things after they were briefed about UAP.
Hmm.
Does that mean anything? It's hard to say. But in the
Yeah.
context of everything else that's going on, it's hard to kind of brush it off as nothing.
Yeah.
And then Gillibrand and Rubio took the DoD to task for a serious funding shortfall for Arrow.
Yeah.
So I see the Congress getting informed, getting weird, and holding the Pentagon's feet to the fire about
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Uh, I hope that'll actually happen. One thing that strikes me is, and this is just maybe something I misunderstand about government. Like, I thought the executive branch was supposed to be like holding everyone's feet to the fire. And it's sort of surprising to me that it's not. But then I guess I don't understand. Uh, my middle school version of government is not really working out right now. It seems a little bit more
it. Right.
complicated.
It is more complicated. And if you remember talking about checks and balances in school, the
Yeah,
idea that the founding fathers had, which has not been perfectly executed, but is
sure.
pretty thoroughly there, is that no one branch of the government can exert its will on the other two.
Mm,
So the
mm,
legislative branch, Congress, can check the power of the president and can check the power of the
okay.
judicial. The
Yeah.
judicial can enforce the rules and
Okay.
interpret the rules, and the executive can shape the leadership, but no one of them can force the other one to do it. Now, in
Okay.
practice, different branches of the government grow and shrink in power.
Yeah.
We are currently going through a period where the president's ability to get shit done independently of Congress is fairly limited.
Yeah.
But because Congress has become so dysfunctional lately, we end up in this kind of gridlock pattern where a president comes in, says they want to do a bunch of things, and unless they get Congress aligned behind them, they kind of can't. They can pass a bunch of
Yeah.
executive orders, but the next president can just undo those. So
Yeah.
you can't
Right.
really make lasting change independently, which is kind of the idea. So, yeah, what you're seeing here is the legislative trying to hold the military to task.
Okay.
And they have some tools in their arsenal to do that, but it's not something that the legislative branch does very often. And it's,
Yeah.
the military tends to kind of have an outsized influence on this country. So that's why, I mean, it remains to be seen about whether they will actually take the next step if the Pentagon doesn't
Right.
do it, of hauling people up and applying penalties and
Right.
consequences,
Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah, I think what you're saying is like the executive branch probably should be holding them to task, but that doesn't mean that Congress can't or
Yeah.
shouldn't. It's just like
Now,
you got to get shit
you
done, and
have,
sometimes that's the fastest to like for a individual senator to write a letter and be like, "Hey, come on, step it up. I don't want to. I don't want to have to talk to your boss.
yeah,
It's a lot easier to just email you."
don't make me come over there.
Yeah, exactly. Don't make me turn
Yeah.
this Congress around.
I'll do it. I've been looking for an excuse to stop funding everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've unintentionally set me up perfectly for our
Oh,
last section here,
sweet.
which is kind of focused on the executive branch.
Okay.
So I've got two bits here. The first one is very small, and I'm going to launch into this, and I'm going to say something shocking and alarming that has
Okay.
absolutely nothing behind it, and nothing has come of it. But it's one of those things like if there's something to it,
Okay.
it's a big fucking deal.
Okay.
On
All right.
February 15th, Ross Coulthard, who is an Australian journalist that I have a lot of respect for, we've talked about him before, he
Okay.
claimed that a source told him that a senior commander in the US Navy has informed Biden of a UAP cover up involving the US Air Force.
Hmm.
Now, this aligns with a lot of what we've heard from the community, that the Air Force is not being straight with it, that they know
Yeah.
more than they're letting on, that the Navy seems to be the one kind of leading the way for disclosure, and they're doing their best, but the Air Force is stonewalling them, and they know things and have access to things that other people don't. And we
Hmm.
constantly hear stories like a Navy pilot saw something, and an Air Force official landed on the boat and took the radar recordings.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like we constantly hear about Air Force people showing up and claiming all the evidence.
Right.
So I will admit this fits with my worldview of how the U.S. military responds to UAP, but it was only one guy saying it. Now, later, Liberation Times claims to have spoken to different sources who claimed the same thing.
Hmm.
Liberation Times is one of those websites. I don't know how seriously to take them. They are UFO focused. They present as a serious media organization, but that's as easy as applying a professional theme to your WordPress blog. So I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know if I have a lot of faith in Liberation Times, but we have multiple sources claiming that a Navy commander went to Biden and said, the Air Force isn't being straight with you.
Hmm.
That is an explosive claim if it's true.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm mentioning that to you, even though there's absolutely nothing to hang my hat on with this claim,
Yeah.
is that story influences how you may understand this next story I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
So, rewinding a couple of days, February 13th, it was announced that Biden had tapped National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan to lead an interagency team to study the broader policy implications for detection, analysis, and disposition of unidentified aerial objects that pose either safety or security risks. Now, this is in the aftermath, this is right in the thick of the unknown objects.
Okay.
Um, so all of a sudden, Biden is spinning up his own UAP task force. The group will include Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines. These are big name people
Yeah.
scattered around the military and the executive branch. Marco Rubio tweeted, why is the White House creating a new
Yeah. Right.
interagency team to monitor, investigate, and report on unidentified aerial objects when we already have Arrow, which we helped
Yeah.
create over 2 years ago?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Why is he? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense on the surface. Uh, like, does Biden just want to score points? Again, viewing this through the lens of politics, Biden wants to be seen as taking action. Okay, well,
Sure.
we've got these weird unidentified objects that have apparently been there for years, but we're just seeing them now. I'm putting together a task force to study it. And maybe that's all that ever comes of it. Or maybe he's literally spinning up a whole UAP office that's going to exist independently of the DoD. It's unclear. And
Yeah.
Marco Rubio, the guy behind Arrow,
Yeah.
is like, what the fuck, bro? A little bit of context came out a few days later. On February 17th, Lou Elizondo, uh, Big Daddy Lou, who headed up ATIP for a number of years, uh, commented on the new office. And he said, Arrow is only defense and intel related, meaning they only have influence in those arenas. The National Security Council, which apparently this new task force will be under, has much broader authorities and can include the input from any organization within the executive, such as Department of Energy, NOAA, DHS, FAA, etc. I think the purpose here is to ensure the president is informed without having to go through several layers of bureaucracy to get the info he needs and wants. That's interesting, right? So
I,
Arrow is DoD only. Biden's task force is kind of up a level in the org chart and is able
yeah.
to talk to non-military sources as well. That still feels a
I
little
thought
weird to me because
Arrow,
Arrow,
yeah.
right, that was kind of the mandate for Arrow. But the main thing to understand is Arrow exists under the Pentagon. The new task
Okay.
force exists under Biden. It's an
Yeah.
executive branch thing. The
Okay.
Liberation Times said this move may also allude to a lack of trust Biden now has in the Pentagon to be forthcoming on UAP. An interagency effort has the potential to cut through the lack of cooperation from entities such as the U.S. Air Force and sections of the intelligence community, something previously experienced by the UAP task force. Which,
Okay.
yeah, we talked about that before. The UAP task force talked about the fact that the Air Force was stonewalling them. We heard
Yeah.
um, we heard UFO Daddy say that the Air Force was like, "Oh, you said they were anomalous aerial phenomena, so we don't have to talk to you about things in space, right?" Like we
Right.
hear these stories about the Air Force stonewalling. So on the one hand, it is confusing that Biden is setting up a competing UAP team. On the other hand, in the context of maybe Biden was told by the Navy, hey, the Air Force is not being straight with you, and they're never going to be.
Yeah.
Biden goes, okay, I'm going to set up a different organization chart here that ensures they're reporting to me and that they must
Yeah.
talk to me. Now,
Yeah.
I don't
Right.
know. This is all Kremlinology, right? This is all reading
Yeah.
between the lines of there's a bunch of pieces out here that all individually don't mean anything. But here I am at the end of 2 weeks of sifting through all this news, and it is really hard for me not to think that all of these little minor pieces that don't mean anything on their own add up to a bigger pattern of something's brewing here. There's something beyond just we shot down 3 hobby balloons and people are embarrassed. Like, and if you are a skeptic, if you are listening and you're going, Scott, you're reaching on this one, hey man, I don't blame you. Like any individual part of this, absolutely. I'm more talking about the vibe of seeing every single one of these things. There's a lot of smoke here for there to be
Yeah.
no fire, but there's no fire visible. I can't tell you there's a fire. I can just tell you, boy, there's a lot of smoke over there. That it
Yeah.
looks weird that there's this much smoke. And you're like, yeah, sometimes things are smoky, Scott. Like,
It's
yeah,
balloons.
all right. It's balloons. It's no big deal. It's just balloons. Unless.
They're just, yeah. They're just objects. It's fine.
So
Yeah.
I would love to hear from
Hmm.
you what your take on this. But if I'm gonna boil down all of this down to my personal gut check on what's going on, I think we've got multiple things happening here. I think there was a political shitstorm around the Chinese balloon where the Republicans were holding Biden's feet to the fire for waiting to shoot it down until it overflew the entire US.
Right.
In reaction to that, they tuned the radar and discovered more objects that were clearly not a threat, but to be seen as decisive, they ordered them shot down. It then
Right.
became a little embarrassing when it turned out this was a hobby club's balloon and a weather balloon and kind of nothing. And the Pentagon, who is already not motivated to be involved in publicly discussing UAP, took the opportunity to press some of their pet reporters to put out stories saying, see, we told you it was all balloons. It's all nothing. Every time they're talking about no flight surfaces, that's just because it's a balloon. It's nothing to worry about. Uh, the Senate gets a briefing on UAP. They come out and say a bunch of weird things after getting this classified briefing. They find out the Pentagon is dragging its feet and not funding the office they're supposed to. Biden perhaps gets told that the U.S. Air Force is lying to him. Then he spins up a new task force. I don't think any one of these things is a big deal, but I think they cumulatively point to a picture of a dysfunctional split
Hmm.
across every level of the government on how to deal with this topic. And I don't want to talk about motives or reasons why, but it looks pretty clear to me that there is a group that wants very badly to stop talking about this and move on, either because they think there's nothing to it or because they're part of a conspiratorial cover up. But for whatever reason, they don't want to talk about it. There's another group that is actively pushing for disclosure and encountering a lot of resistance. I don't know, man. It's been a
Yeah.
weird 2 weeks. The vibes are off.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
circling the drain on this a lot because I don't have a
Yeah.
way to wrap this up in a tiny bow. But that's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm seeing. I don't think it's as simple as Biden knows there are UFOs. He shot one down and he's lying to us. I don't think it's as simple as the military knows about it and they're covering it up. I think there are multiple factions fighting, and I don't think very many people know a lot about it. I think there's multiple reasons for everyone to be doing everything, and all of this shit informs the other, you know? So anyway,
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop rambling now. What do you think, man? It's been a weird 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You were on UFO Reddit for the first time.
I know, right?
How
Like
are you doing?
what's even happening? Yeah, I sort of there's a temptation uh in my mind to hope that there's a mastermind, that there's some
Right?
like person who's like, oh, I don't want to talk about UAPs. We're going to tell the entire military they're going to change how they communicate. And when I when I think about it in that way, I'm like, Hanlon's razor, Chuck. This is not happening. Like
Right, right.
all those colonels and whatever they read the news
Mhm.
and they're like, oh, I don't want to get a bunch of questions about this, and I don't want to be proven false. I'm just gonna like give the most like objective report I possibly can. Oh God, this is going so much worse than I planned. Like I
Right?
should have just said it was a fucking balloon, even though I don't know
Hmm.
for sure.
Hmm.
Now it's
Hmm.
just so much worse. And then there's like a whole like media cycle about that, and they're like, God, this is just
Hmm.
terrible. Can't we just go back to saying it was balloons? But
Ross
I
Coulthart's
still
take
appreciate.
on this
Oh yeah, go ahead.
has been that he thinks there are alien objects flying around in our sky,
Sure.
but they are not a threat and they don't seem to be doing anything. And the military knows about them, but frankly is embarrassed about the fact that they can't do anything about it. And
Yeah.
so after they kind of determined they weren't a threat, they said, okay, we're just not going to talk about it. And there's this culture of not talking about this weird thing that isn't a threat because if you talk about it, you have to admit that there's something up there that we can't interact with. We can't do anything
Well, yeah.
about. They are moving through our skies with impunity. What do you do with that? Like
Yeah.
I I can understand how you could be a high-ranking member of the military and be find out about this, and your course of action should be, yeah, just keep not talking about it.
Yeah.
I get that. I'm not happy about that answer, but I understand how you could end up in this spot of, I don't know, like, will talking about it do anything? Is there anything we can do about it?
Freak
No?
out the
Okay, then
public.
why?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And like we've seen what happens when we start talking about aliens. The US like public just goes absolutely bonkers. And and we've seen what happens when we dangle the threat of nuclear war. The US public goes bonkers. Like they start building bunkers and it makes everyone very unhappy. So like I guess the utilitarian part of me is like, yeah, maybe the US public can't handle that. Uh, maybe they are doing the right
Right?
thing for us. I don't know. That's a hard choice to make.
Yeah,
Certainly not
yeah.
one I would want to like. Yeah, like you said, if I was presented with that and was like, well, you could wake up the U.S. public, or you could just not talk about it. Like, fuck it. All right, let's just
Mhm.
not talk about it. That sounds way easier. I got other shit to do
Absolutely.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, because as much as I would like to believe, like, oh, the aliens are here and we have a secret treaty with them and there's all this stuff, because if it came out, it would make our life better or at least more interesting. It sure looks
maybe.
like the most plausible answer is they're here and they kind of don't care about us.
Yeah,
That's weird. I don't know how to feel about that.
yeah, yeah. I
What
mean,
if they're not here for us? What if they're here for the dolphins?
right? Like,
Like,
I
oh
don't know.
man, dolphins, you got a really bad land mammal infestation going on here.
I know we've tried to get rid of them so many times, but man, yeah. Afterwards, remind me to tell you the dolphin story. Um,
Okay.
but
I don't know,
totally
man.
not UFO
It's been
related.
a
Yeah,
weird month.
yeah,
Real weird month. We shot down UFOs, but they're probably nothing, but maybe there's something. Like,
yeah, yeah.
you
Wild.
know?
All right. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how this like plays out over the next, couple months or year or whatever.
Mhm.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
It's exciting times.
It is going to be fun. It's a very exciting time. You know, I'm so grateful a few episodes ago you talked about how that had kind of changed the way that you view things. We
Yeah,
kind of landed on that tagline kind of not unintentionally, but kind of like quickly without putting a lot of thought into it. And every time I come back to it, I'm like, man, we could not have landed on a better tagline, mainly because
yeah.
it informs how I think about this. There have been
Hmm.
times where I have wanted to come to you and talk to you about something, and I've hesitated because I'm like, well, I don't really have any evidence of this, right? Like, it's a fun story, but like, there's a like when we
Yeah,
talked about Betty and Barney Hill, right? Like, there's an awful lot of ammunition there if you don't believe it.
yeah,
And if I'm only representing so many stories to you, I kind of want them to be the bangers. I want them to be the ones
hmm.
that like
Yeah.
genuinely could be real. Um, but coming back to that idea of if any of this is true,
Whew.
it's very exciting. It it kind of gives us an excuse to be able to talk about the weird stuff
Yeah.
without necessarily putting a pin in it and saying, I believe this or
Right.
this is a thing. It's more like this is weird and maybe 80% of what we're talking about is bullshit. But that last bit, if
Yeah,
it's
that could be
real,
interesting.
it could be
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. The universe is a way weirder place than I think we give it credit.
Yeah, for real. For real.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, I think that about wraps it up for today. I'm not 100% sure what we'll be talking about. Like maybe we'll shoot down some more UFOs and we'll be talking about
Yeah.
that. But
Here's
if
hoping.
nothing big happens, I think next week I'm gonna, speaking of leaning into the weird stories that I can't prove,
Yeah.
I think next time we might talk about Anjali.
Okay.
Anjali is a very interesting lady who claims to have met a bunch of aliens in a base inside of a mountain. Uh,
Okay.
and she has some interesting views on that. Most of the story has since been debunked, but she has not backed down. And it's one of those ones like, if you were to pin me to the wall and say, Scott, do you believe Anjali? I'd be like, probably not.
Hmm.
But it's so much fun. Oh my
Yeah.
God, her story is so much fun. And I have had followed her story with great delight over the years. And she kind of
Yeah.
just put herself back in the spotlight. And I've been
Oh.
kind of meaning to find a way to bring her up. So it's kind of a
Hey,
perfect
there
time.
you go.
So Unless we
Okay,
shoot down another
perfect.
UFO. Probably next time we'll be talking about Anjali.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. Thank you all for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.